go ahead and open with prayer. O Heavenly King, the comforter, the Spirit of truth, who art in all places and fillest all things, treasury of good things and giver of life, come and dwell in us, cleanse us from every stain, and save our souls, O gracious Lord. Amen. So, when we pick up tonight, in just a moment, we're going to be picking up at the beginning of Exodus chapter 5. So we're still in the early portions of the life of Moses, but to sort of catch us up quickly to where we are. So Moses had left Egypt after killing the Egyptian and gone and met Zipporah, who became his wife, and met his now father-in-law Jethro, who is a priest among the Midianites. The Midianites, as we said, were made up of Edomites and Ishmaelites primarily. And so they're also Abrahamites, although not Israelites. Lots of ites there all in a row. And so it was while he was there for many years with Jethro, he was shepherding his flocks near the mountain of God. He had the encounter with the burning bush that we talked about, in which Yahweh, who's about to become the God of Israel, sent him to return to Egypt to bring the message that God was going to deliver his people out of Egypt. And we saw that Moses was less than enthusiastic about taking on this job, and had a little bit of an argument with God that culminated in God getting angry. And eventually God said, well, he's going to send Aaron also. And this is the beginning of the split between sort of ruling authority that would later become the monarchy in Israel on the one hand, and priestly authority, with Aaron eventually going to become the first high priest of Israel. But we saw that even then, when Moses was supposed to go and meet Aaron on the way back to Egypt, instead he went back to Jethro and talked to Jethro, and Jethro told him to go. And we're told after some time he still hadn't gone. So there was this sort of recalcitrance on his part. And then there was this episode in which it was revealed by Zipporah, Moses' wife, that Moses was not circumcised himself and had not circumcised their son. She took the matter into her own hands and circumcised their son. And then sort of finally, after all this, Moses went, and at the end of our last Bible study, he did indeed meet Aaron on the way to Egypt. And now the two of them are on their way back to Egypt to see Pharaoh and pass on to him God's demand that he release the Israelite people. So that's sort of a recap of where we are. As I said, we're still sort of very early in Moses' story. But so unless anybody here live has any leftover questions or comments or energy drink recommendations, we'll go ahead and pick up in Exodus chapter 5, verse 1. Now after this, Moses and Aaron went and spoke to Pharaoh. Thus says the Lord God of Israel, let my people go, so they may hold a feast to me in the desert. Okay. So, cut to, right, Moses and Aaron arrive. They get an audience with the Pharaoh. This is many, many years later. So this is not the same Pharaoh in whose household Moses grew up. Usually in Ten Commandments or Prince of Egypt, etc., This is depicted as the son of that Pharaoh, which it may indeed have been. We aren't directly told here. It could be a son, could be a grandson. We aren't told. But the current Pharaoh, Moses and Aaron go to see, and their initial statement is that they want him to let the Israelites go so that they may hold a feast to Yahweh, their God, in the desert. Right. So this is not, you need to release us, we're leaving and we're never coming back. It's just they want to go out to, presumably to the mountain of God, where Moses encountered Yahweh, their God, in order to worship him. Verse 2, then Pharaoh said, who is he that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go. So, of course, in the original, it's Yahweh. It's I do not know Yahweh. I do not know this Yahweh, right? Who is this God of yours that I should listen to him? And this response makes sense from the perspective of Pharaoh, right? So whoever this God is, he clearly isn't super familiar with this God. And whoever it is apparently the God of a bunch of slaves. That's not a God that he, as an Egyptian, is going to respect, right? Because the pagan gods, of course, not just in Egypt, but pretty much everywhere, were gods of attributes that people were pursuing, right? They were gods of strength and wealth and fertility, virility, beauty, victory in war, power, these kind of things. These are the things that the pagan nations worshipped. And basic to ancient religious understanding is that they would worship these spirits because they wanted to become like them. Right? So sort of the idea of theosis is not a new thing in Orthodox Christian theology or even in Jewish theology. They believed they became like their gods. So they would worship, a goddess of beauty because they believed that would make them more beautiful. They worshiped a god who represented victory in war because they wanted victory in war, right? So from that perspective of their understanding, you can understand why somebody coming up to Pharaoh, who was considered to be a god himself, at this time in history, the Pharaoh was considered to be Horus, like an incarnation of Horus, a living idol of Horus, who is the sort of falcon-headed Egyptian god who you've probably seen. So this person who considers himself a god, who considers the gods of Egypt to be his peers, who are the gods of victory and everything, receives a demand from the god of slaves, right? Like, so to him, this seems silly. Like, well, clearly, since you guys are all slaves, you must not be a very good god, right? Or you wouldn't be my slaves. My gods must be more powerful, right? Pharaoh's mind, he must be more powerful than this God of the Israelites. So his response here, notice, is not just, this is not a contest of wills, the way we often see it, the way it's often portrayed in sort of popular movies and stuff, some sort of contest of wills between Pharaoh and Moses. Right. What we're going to see, and this is going to be explicit as we go forward in the story, is that this is a battle between God, like Yahweh, the God of Israel, the God who created the universe, and Pharaoh and Pharaoh's gods. And, spoilers, we know who's going to win, right? But this is Pharaoh sort of throwing down the gauntlet. But this is a theme that we see here and is going to play out all through the scriptures, which is that the God who created the universe, the true God, the God who created everything, who is Lord of everything, chooses not to identify himself. This is true of the Old Testament, right? Chooses not to identify himself with power, with victory in war, with physical beauty, with wealth, right? When God chooses to identify with someone, the first person he chooses to identify himself with, remember, was Abraham, who was a nomad, right? And Isaac and Jacob, who were these nomads. And now with the Israelites, who are slaves. And we're going to see later on in the Torah, in the Pentateuch, he's going to identify himself as the God who protects orphans and widows and the poor, right? So he's going to choose to identify with those people to avenge their cause, right? He's not going to identify with kings and the wealthy and the powerful. And so it shouldn't be a surprise, as we're having this Bible study, we're not that far removed from the Feast of Christ's Nativity, that when Christ was born, he was not born as the son of the Roman emperor. He was not even born as the son of King Herod, right? That he's born as the son of dirt poor peasants and is born put in an animal food trough, right? When he's first born, because God continues, right? And this continues all the way through the New Testament. This is a theme in St. Paul's writings. He talks about how God has chosen the weak things of this world to confound the strong, right? So this is a through line about who God is. And so it's not that Pharaoh has incorrectly identified who God is. God is saying, has chosen to identify himself as the God of this group of enslaved people, right? The problem is that Pharaoh is grossly overestimating himself and grossly underestimating the power of God, right? And it's because God is who he is, the creator of all things, the almighty, the all-powerful, that he can choose to identify with the weak, right? Very, very secure and wise and strong people are very rarely narcissistic. And the same is true with God. We find Pharaoh, who considers himself a small g god, is narcissistic, right? The gods of Egypt demand constant glorification and care and feeding, right? But the God who created the universe needs nothing, right? And so he can choose to identify with the weak. But so Pharaoh, as we already saw, of course, God has already said he knew this was going to happen, right? But Pharaoh, as already predicted, is not interested in hearing anything from a God of slaves, let alone obeying it. Verse 3. So they said, the God of the Hebrews has called us to him. Let us go 3 days' journey into the desert and sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest at any time death or slaughter happen to us. Okay, so they say to him, they try a sort of slightly different tack, right? They say, well, look, because clearly, right, Pharaoh is unimpressed, but they say, well, look, yes, okay, but this is our God, right? And he has commanded that we go worship him. And if we disobey our God, something bad might happen to us, right? So this is sort of an attempt to get around Pharaoh's ego, right? And say, okay, well, look, forget about you, right? Something bad might happen to us if we're disobedient to our God, right? Thinking maybe Pharaoh will track with this. Then the king of Egypt said to them, why, Moses and Aaron, do you take the people from their work? Get back to your work. Again, Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are many now, so let us not give them rest from their work. Okay. So on the first point, he says, look, right, you want me to let them go 3 days out, have a feast, 3 days back, right? They've got work to do. They're enslaved, right? They've got work to do for me. And then takes it a step further and says to Moses and Aaron, why don't you two get back to work? As far as he's concerned, Moses and Aaron are his slaves too. And then that second statement that Pharaoh makes is calling us back to remember sort of the hard labor he's forced upon the Israelites was part of his plan to sort of help depopulate them. That's why he mentions how many they are, right? And so the idea is he's keeping them under hard labor to try to slow down the rate at which they reproduce so they won't become a threat to him in his mind. After he had given that order to murder their sons. And so he says, last thing I'm going to do. Now, this would have been his grandfather. This would have been the previous Pharaoh. So this Pharaoh is continuing that same policy. He says, the last thing I'm going to do is give them time off their labor. That might give them a chance. If I give them a chance to rest, that might give them a chance to start increasing in numbers again. Verse 6, so the same day, Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their clerks, saying, you shall no longer give the people straw to make bricks as yesterday and the day before. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. Furthermore, you shall lay on them a daily quota of bricks they are to do each day. You shall hold them to it. You shall not reduce it, for they are loafers. Therefore they cry out, saying, let us go and sacrifice to our God. Let the labors of these men be oppressive and cause them anxiety, and let them not pay attention to empty words. Okay. So not only does Pharaoh not let them go, he says, if they've got time to even think about this, apparently they're not working hard enough. So he does these two things. First of all, he stops getting them straw. So the bricks they're making are fired mud bricks. And you would mix in straw because straw would help the brick you're making hold its shape until it could be fired, right? If you just have mud, the mud is going everywhere, right? It's hard to shape. And so they say, stop giving them straw, let them go sort of forage and try to find straw and reeds and stuff to use themselves. But despite the fact that they're now having to go and find their own straw and everything, you need to hold them to their quota of how many bricks they're going to make. Right. And he says, and make sure that quota is high enough that they could only barely do it, if at all. Right. And so he's concerned that since he turned down Moses and Aaron are going to go to the people and sort of rally them to either try and escape into the desert or have some kind of insurrection. And so he's going to put a stop to that. And one can presume also that when these new measures were inflicted, that these taskmasters and clerks would be telling the people, oh, by the way, it's because of those troublemakers, Moses and Aaron, that we're doing this to you, right? To sort of make sure that this didn't become sort of a popular movement. Verse 10. So the taskmasters of the people and their clerks went out and spoke to the people, saying, thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you straw. Go get it yourselves wherever you can find it, yet nothing will be reduced from your workload. The people were then dispersed throughout all the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw. The taskmasters also forced them to hurry, saying, fulfill your daily quota of work, as when straw was given to you. And the clerks from the race of the children of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters set over them, were beaten and questioned. Why have you not fulfilled your task in making bricks both yesterday and the day before, and also today? Okay. So we've got these two groups, taskmasters and clerks. So the taskmasters are the Egyptians who are in charge of overseeing sort of the slave labor. The clerks are essentially compradors. They're Israelites who in return for having a little elevated position, probably getting more food, better lodging, and that kind of thing, have this sort of supervisor role over the other Israelite slaves. So they're sort of cooperating, right? But they're also responsible for making sure that the quotas get met, that everybody keeps working. And so when these harsher measures are instituted and the Israelite slaves aren't able to keep up with the demands, then it's these clerks, these supervisors, these Israelite supervisors who are blamed and are taken and beaten, and then the idea would be that they would go and then have to pass that on to the people working under them. Verse 15, then the clerks of Israel's sons entered and cried out to Pharaoh, saying, why are you dealing thus with your servants? No straw is given your servants, and they say to us, make bricks. And indeed your servants are beaten, but the fault is with your own people. But he said, you are loafers, you are loafers. Therefore you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Now therefore go and work, for no straw shall be given you, yet you shall deliver the quota of bricks. So the clerks from the children of Israel saw they were in trouble after it was said, you shall not reduce any bricks from your daily quota. So the clerks kind of get together and try to kind of appeal this, right, to Pharaoh. Now, this would not be, they all made a trip to where Pharaoh was and all went into his presence. This would probably be a written, right, appeal. But they're saying, look, we're being beaten, we're being mistreated and everything, but it's not our fault. We're doing everything we can. It's that your taskmasters have given us these unreasonable demands that we can't make. And so the response they get would probably also have been in writing and would have been read to them, right? That, no, you're a bunch of loafers, you're lazy. That's why you want to go out in the desert and sacrifice, right? So no, these are the policies. You're just going to have to find a way to do it. Verse 20, then as they departed from Pharaoh, they met Moses and Aaron, who stood there to meet them. They said to them, let the Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us abhorrent in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, to put a sword in his hand to kill us. So they run, some of them, who had been conveying this appeal, run into Moses and Aaron and say, this is your fault, right? Yahweh, our God, could judge you because all you've done is you're going to end up getting us killed, right? There's going to be more death. We were already enslaved. You've made everything worse, right? Not better, with whatever you tried to pull, right? So Pharaoh's sort of plan here to sort of turn the Israelite people, the Hebrew people, against Moses and Aaron has pretty much worked at this point, right? There's about, it would appear, at least at this point, there's about zero chance of any kind of popular movement happening and following Moses and Aaron. And of course, Pharaoh is not interested in hearing from them either. Verse 22, so Moses returned to the Lord and said, O Lord, why have you brought trouble on this people? Why is it you sent me? From the time I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has afflicted the people. Neither have you delivered your people at all. So Moses, once again, right, his response to this is not to go back to Pharaoh, not to sort of say, well, look, God said he's going to deliver his people. He's going to do it, right? It's not to try and reassure these Israelites, right? It's to go back to God and say, what are you doing? Why'd you even send me here? You just made things worse, right? And to sort of throw the blame back at God. This is going to be a theme, right, that we're going to see develop. Moses is mostly, but not entirely, going to grow past it. We'll see how this plots through Moses' life. we've seen as we've gone through the life of David and as we've gone through the life of Abraham, that in sort of every case, right, even though these are great saints of the Old Testament, that they are not perfect, right? They all have their weaknesses. They all have their places where sin and temptation come to them. And with Moses, we're starting to see a part of what that is. We're starting to see that part of that is, or the way that when he has doubts, when he has a lack of faith or faithfulness, the way that expresses itself tends to be not having a trust in God to do what he said he's going to do. Or when things go wrong, tending to sort of try to confront or blame him for it. And we'll see how this develops over the course of his life. It's also important to note that this is continuing what we've already seen with Moses, where Moses was sort of trying to get out of going on this mission in the first place, right? Trying to talk God into sending somebody else, trying not to making excuses and trying not to go himself. And at first, it could seem like we talked about this a little bit last time. It could seem like it's in the context of humility, and there are plenty of places where Moses in his life shows great humility, but there's a fundamental difference here, at least right now, here at the beginning of Moses's sort of journey in his life, and that's that what's reflected here is again a certain amount of lack of trust in God. Right. So it is humility when we feel that God is calling us to do something, when we see some situation in our life, in our family, in our church parish, in our workplace, in our community at large, right? We see some situation, we feel that God is calling us to address it. There's some work that we feel that God is calling us to do. It is humility to look at that and say, I don't think I'm up to the task. Right? I don't think I have it in me to accomplish this. I don't know that I can do this. But there's an important second step after that. The second step after that is, I can't do this, but God can do this. Right? God can do this through me if he chooses to do it through me. Right? And that is another level of humility. Right? Because if we stop at, I'm not up to the task, right? I feel that God wants me to do this. God is calling me to do this, but I'm not up to the task, so I'm not going to, right? Then ultimately, even though it starts out sounding like humility, it becomes, I'm going to do my will, not God's, right? I'm going to follow what I think is right, not what God thinks is right or what God is calling me to. And so that second step reflects a real and deeper humility of, even though I am not up to the task, God can do it. And God is great enough to do it even through someone like me. And this is related to that theme that we already talked about of God being the God of slaves, the God of widows and orphans, right? The God of the poor, the God of the despised, right? Is that, and St. Paul says this, right? That God has chosen to hide his treasures in earthen vessels, right? He talks about how he even at one point calls himself and the other apostles the offscourings of all creation, right? But he doesn't doubt for a minute what God could do through the apostles, despite that fact, right? And so for Moses, at least right now, there's this missing piece. He has this first piece, right? He doesn't have this sort of ego that Pharaoh does, right? Pharaoh thinks he can take on a god and win, right? So Pharaoh has a different kind of problem, right? Moses doesn't have that. Moses doesn't have that ego, but he still hasn't let his sort of humility overcome his willfulness, right? He hasn't let his humility pass on to, yes, I'm not up to it, but God is able to do this, and he can even do it through somebody like me, right? If I'm faithful to what he's calling me to. And so that's why we get this, even now, this resistance from him, right? This sort of resistance. And Moses, just like we saw with David and with Abraham, is not going to be a static character. He's going to grow and change and learn and be transformed in his life as we go on, and we'll see that. But right now, he's got this important next step that he hasn't taken yet. So at the beginning of chapter 6, God responds to him. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. With a strong hand he will let them go, and with a strong hand he will drive them from his land." Okay. So when Moses expresses these kinds of doubts and things, you notice God doesn't give Moses a pep talk. He doesn't say, "No, Moses, you got this," right? That's just, let's go, Moses. Believe in yourself, right? He says to Moses, you're going to see, you're going to bear witness to what I'm about to do, right? What I'm about to do to Pharaoh. So God understands exactly what Pharaoh just did, right? That Pharaoh was calling him out, right? God presented a demand to Pharaoh through Moses, and in response, Pharaoh picked a fight with God. And so God is now going to, with Moses as his witness, respond by doing something to Pharaoh, right? And that's left, at least in this statement, that's left vague. Now, there's this strong hand language. Strong hand is the way it's translated in the Orthodox Study Bible. Some other translations has strong arm, obviously related language. So he's saying about Pharaoh, because it's he, with a strong hand, Pharaoh will let them go. With a strong hand, he will drive them from his land. So not only is Pharaoh going to let them go, he's going to shove you out the door, right? It's not just going to be, he's going to leave it open so you can leave if you want. He's going to throw you out by the time I'm done with him. But so this strong hand, strong arm language, we're going to see this as we go forward in the story, this language over and over again. And it's even all through the rest of the Old Testament whenever Egypt is talked about, right? So for example, in Isaiah, when there's an oracle against Egypt at that time, it says that God is going to break the arm of Pharaoh, right? And later on in the Song of the Sea, it's going to talk about Yahweh, the Lord, doing a mighty act with his own arm, right? And the right hand of the Lord, and this is directed around Egypt. There's a reason for this. So the Egyptian war god at this point in history is the god Montu. And Montu, who is the Egyptian war god, is related to Horus, who Pharaoh is supposed to be, right? Pharaoh is supposed to be an embodiment of Horus. So with pagan gods, it's been a long time since we talked about that. I think we talked about this at one point. We were talking in the life of David, but so pagan gods had different localizations. They had sort of different local forms, right? And so this is why, if you've ever read Homer, like if you go and read the Iliad, there's like 8 or 9 different names for one god or one goddess, right? And you're just supposed to know they're supposed to be the same god. Well, what that originates from is that different cities had different gods that they worshipped. And so as there were sort of larger social units within Greece, for example, or within Egypt, so that all of these cities, different cities with their different gods, were part of one larger unit, right? One larger kingdom, then they would sort of incorporate those gods together. And they would say, well, this goddess who you worship, and this goddess who they worship, and this goddess who we worship, they all seem kind of similar, right? So they would say these are different versions of the same god, right? Or the same goddess. And then other times they would say, well, no, that's a different god or a different goddess that would have a different name. So Montu, who is the Egyptian war god at this point in history, primarily worshipped, well, I don't think it was Thebes yet, but depends on when you date the Exodus, which we're not getting into once again. But Montu was sort of a form of Horus. And the way that was expressed was that Montu, the war god, was said to be the right arm or the right hand of Horus. Meaning a reference to the right hand of Pharaoh, who's seen to be the embodiment of Horus, is a reference to Montu, this Egyptian war god. So when in that prophecy, God says he's going to break the right arm of Egypt, right? What he's saying to them is, I'm going to take your war god, right? The one that leads you into battle, I'm going to smash him, right? I'm going to crush him, which means you're going down, right? So when we find inscriptions from this period in Egypt about, for example, victories in battle that Pharaoh has won, Pharaoh will brag about how he, smashed the Hittites with his right arm or his right hand, right? Or how he, drove back the Philistines into the sea with his right arm, with his strong right arm, right? So God is here inverting that language, right? So it's not, he's going to be able to oppose God with his right arm. It's God saying, when I'm through with him, he's going to use all of his power and all of his might to send you on your way, just like I told him to. Right? So this is God saying he's going to be defeated utterly, right? By using sort of Pharaoh's own symbolism of his power against him, right? Verse 2, chapter 6. God also spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as their God, but I did not reveal to them my name, Lord. This is one of the problems with the Greek translations, is, of course, that's covering the name Yahweh, right? So he's saying, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and notice that language. He appeared to them. We talked about this when we were going through the life of Abraham, that God actually appeared to Abraham visually. Abraham saw him, not just at the Oak of Mamre, but on several occasions. But he was not revealed to them as Yahweh, is what this is saying. So this little verse ruined Old Testament scholarship for about 2 centuries. And you say, how did that happen? Well, how that happened is, this is not the first place where the name Yahweh occurs in the Torah, in the Pentateuch. In fact, in many of the stories of Abraham, and we talked about this at the time, it says, Yahweh appeared to Abraham. Abraham calls him Yahweh several times. Going all the way back to Genesis 1 and 2 in the creation of the world, the name Yahweh appears. So people looked at that, mostly 18th century and early 19th century Germans, and said, oh, well, look, see, this is a contradiction. look, this is a contradiction. They said, so there must be two different traditions here. And this is where the whole idea of J and E as sources for the Torah or Pentateuch came from. They said there's one source that refers to God as Yahweh and one that refers to him as Elohim. And there were two different sources that they got put together. And whoever put them together was a literary genius for crafting such a beautiful document, but apparently missed this obvious contradiction somehow. Wink. Right? So, you could probably tell from my tone that this is kind of ridiculous, right? And people have mostly gotten over that. But so to understand what's going on here, right? If the question is what is going on here, because he's saying here he didn't reveal himself to them as Yahweh, but it sure looks like when we were reading Genesis, he had revealed himself to them as Yahweh, with that, including that name, right? We have to look at the way this phrase, right? This they did, it was revealed my name to them as Yahweh. The way that kind of phrase is used in the rest of the Torah, the rest of the Pentateuch, and then in the rest of the Old Testament. And over again, this phrase appears, then they will know that my name is Yahweh. So for example, this phrase appears in Ezekiel in a few very prominent places. So Ezekiel is a prophet who's living in the exile in Babylon. So in the middle of the 6th century BC. So between 600 and 900 years after Moses. And when Ezekiel prophesies, he says, then they will know that my name is Yahweh. And if we read it the same way that those scholars read Exodus here, we'd be like, oh, aha. They didn't know his name is Yahweh until after the exile. Right? But no one argues that, right? Nobody at all argues that. Because, for example, one prominent place it appears when we hear it every year at Pascha time is in the Valley of the Dry Bones prophecy in Ezekiel. And it says, then you will know that I am Yahweh when I have given life to your bones, when I have raised your dead, O Israel, then you will know that I am Yahweh, right? So if this doesn't just mean, which it clearly doesn't just, well, then you will know that name as opposed to calling God something else, right? What is going on? So the names of God, and if you want to get really, really deep into this, you can read Saint Dionysius the Areopagite on the divine names. But the names of God don't name God's essence, they name his energies. What does that mean? That means the names of God, the different names of God in Scripture, reveal to us who God is to us and his activities in the world and in his creation. So in this case, the name Yahweh, and so it's more of a title than a proper name. And the name Yahweh is the, in Hebrew, the Hifil third person singular. That's the fancy way for language nerds to say it's a causative way of expressing the verb to be. Meaning Yahweh means literally he who causes to be. He who causes things to be. He who causes things to be that before were not, right? And this name is explained out this way in Scripture and other places, right? God causes things to be that before were not. So this is his act of creation, but you can see how it fits, for example, in that prophecy in Ezekiel, right? When I have given life to your dead, when I have restored your bones to life, then you will know that I am he who causes things to be, right? And so it means the same thing here, right? So he revealed himself to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob knew the God of Israel. That's why he's the God of Israel. That's Jacob's other name, right? They knew him, and they apparently knew the name Yahweh. But he had not yet been revealed to them as the one who causes things to be, the one who creates, right? Because what is God about to do? God is about to create the nation of Israel. There is right now no nation of Israel. Doesn't exist. There's a table of nations listing all the nations of the world. Back in Genesis chapter 10, Israel isn't on it. Right? What Israel is right now, the sons of Israel that we're talking about, is a group of enslaved descendants of Abraham and some others, right? From that region of the world in Egypt. But that's not a nation. That's barely a people group, right? But God is about to make them into a nation. God doesn't choose one of the nations of the world to be his chosen people. He creates a nation that before was not a nation and was not a people. And we're going to see later on as we get to the end of this chapter that Israel, when they're first created, is going to be ethnically diverse. A lot of people have this idea in their head that Israel in the Old Testament was sort of an ethnic people, and then the church in the New Testament is sort of multi-ethnic and open to everybody, right? But both the church and Israel, when they begin, are made up of an ethnically diverse group of people. But we'll see more of that as we go on. But this nation that before did not exist is going to come into being. And so that's what this is talking about. When that happens, when the people see this happen, when they see what God is going to do to Pharaoh, when they see this deliverance, when they're brought together as a people, when before they were just a scattered group of slaves, right? Then they're going to know. Then they're going to know that Yahweh, that the God of Israel, is he who causes things to be, is the creator, is the redeemer, is the one who makes things exist that before were not. Chapter 6, verse 4, I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of the Canaanites, the land of their sojourn, in which they were strangers. So he says, that land where your ancestors were nomads before they had to come to Egypt, I promised I would give it to them. Right? And now he's going to make good on that promise. I have also heard the groaning of the children of Israel, whom the Egyptians keep in bondage, and I remembered my covenant. Therefore I say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord. I will bring you out from under the Egyptian tyranny. I will rescue you from their bondage and redeem you with an outstretched arm and great judgments. Okay. So you see that arm language again, right? God is going to stretch out his arm to redeem them. And that redeem language is important. That redeem language is important because to redeem something is to buy it back. This is language of buying, right? Of purchasing, of paying a price, right? And so Israel, right now they are slaves. And today's word of the day will be manumission, right? Which is, manumission means to purchase someone out of slavery, right? But notice, because spoilers, I think we all know where this is going. God is not going to actually pay Pharaoh any money, right? To ask the question, okay, what is the debt and to whom is God paying it, is to miss the point, right? God's going to redeem them out of slavery. He's going to do it by sort of smashing Pharaoh, as he's already said, right, with the right arm of his power, right? But the reason I'm harping on this is that remember, this is going to happen at the Passover. Christ's death happens at the Passover. And so we get this same kind of language in the New Testament about debt, about forgiveness of debt, about redemption, about being bought with a price. And when this language shows up in the New Testament, people want to take it totally differently than it's taken here in Exodus. And they want to say, well, no, this is literally some kind of price, and it's paid, or ransom, and it's paid to the devil, or it's paid to, to God the Father, or it's paid to, right? And it's equally the wrong question to ask in the New Testament as it is here, right? Because the reason the New Testament is using that language is that that's the language that's used in Exodus. It's just now we're being set free from slavery to sin and to death and to the devil, rather than to, Pharaoh and the Egyptian taskmasters, right? But the quote unquote mechanism or what have you is not different. That's why the same sort of language is used. Yeah. I will take you as my people and be your God. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under Egyptian tyranny, right? So again, then you will know that I am Yahweh your God. Then you will know that I am Yahweh, right? Well, doesn't Moses know it right now? Right? In the sense that, yes, he knows that that is one of God's names, but he's going to know it in a different way when he sees this happen, when he sees what God is going to do. I will also bring you into the land I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you as a heritage. I am the Lord. So Moses spoke thus to the children of Israel, but they paid no heed to Moses because of their faint-heartedness and cruel bondage. And so Moses does go back to the people and pass on what God has said to him. But the people are just sort of too broken and too tired and too abused and too traumatized in slavery to, even be able to sort of take this on board. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, go in, tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to send forth the children of Israel from his land. Moses then spoke before the Lord, saying, the children of Israel have paid no heed to me. How then shall Pharaoh heed me? For I am not eloquent. Right? So notice, we're right back here again. Right? We're right back here again. So it's not just that the people are sort of broken, it's that, does Moses really believe it? Right? He's like, the regular people won't listen to me. Pharaoh isn't going to listen to me. I'm not eloquent. I'm nobody. Right? And so again, he hasn't taken that second step of, yes, Moses by himself is not up to this. If this were a contest between the human Moses and the human Pharaoh, with God not involved, Pharaoh wins 10 out of 10 times, right? But that's not what's happening here, right? And Moses is still on his way to learning and understanding that. Thus the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron and gave them a command for the children of Israel and for Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to send forth the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. Right? He says, no, right? This is you give Pharaoh a command, right? God is now ordering Pharaoh to do it. Right? And there will be consequences. I mean, it's not spoilers when he does not comply. So now, for most of the rest of chapter 6, not all of it, starting in verse 14, we get a list of the clans within the different tribes of Israel. Now, these are the heads of their fathers' houses. The sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, were Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. This is the family of Reuben. Now, the sons of Simeon were Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. These are the families of Simeon. Now, these are the names of the sons of Levi according to their genealogy: Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And Levi lived 137 years. The sons of Gershon were Libni and Shimei, the houses of their family. The sons of Kohath were Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziek. And Kohath lived 137 years. The sons of Merari were Mali and Mushi. These are the families of Levi according to their kindreds. Now Amram took as his wife Jochebed, the daughter of his father's brother, and she bore him Aaron and Moses and Miriam their sister. And Amram lived 137 years. The sons of Izhar were Korah, Nepheg, and Zikri. Korah is going to show up later. The sons of Uzziel were Mishael, Elsaphan, and Zithri. Now Aaron took as his wife Elisheba, daughter of Aminadab, the sister of Nahshon, and she bore him Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. The sons of Korah were Aser, Elkanah, and Abiasaph. This is the genealogy of Korah. Eleazar, Aaron's son, took as his wife one of the daughters of Putiel, and she bore him Phinehas. These are the heads of the families of the Levites according to their genealogy. Okay. And then we stop, right? That's the end. So it goes from just a list into a genealogy a little bit with the Levite clans, and then we just stop. We don't even get to Judah, let alone the other tribes. We have this sort of partial listing, and the most detailed piece that we get is about the Levites. You could probably already see why this is Moses and Aaron are part of this Levite lineage. The names of these sort of sons of people, right? These are the names of clans. So the social organization of Israel is that each of the 12 tribes, and remember, Joseph is actually represented by two what are called half tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. So there's actually kind of 13 tribes. Just two of them are descended from Joseph. Those tribes are made up of clans, which are big extended family units. And then within those clans are individual extended families. So people are not living in nuclear families, mom, dad, kids, right, for another 3,000 years or so. So this is, grandma, grandpa, uncles, aunts, cousins, right? And then groups of those who, for example, have the same great grandfather, right, will be part of the same clan, right? And then those clans make up the larger unit of tribe, right? And so what's important here, though, is that we already see, and we're going to see a lot more evidence of this as we go on, that there's a bunch of people here who aren't, ethnically speaking, descended from Jacob. So, for example, there's a Canaanite woman who pops up in there, right? But even more telling is some of the stuff among the Levites. So among the Levites, first off, there's a bunch of Egyptian names, which is odd, right? So we talked about Moses' name already. That Moses' name means child in Egyptian from this period. So, right, we're told when Pharaoh's daughter found him, she said, "Oh, this is a child to me." So she names him Moses. And Moses is very often part of a larger name. So you may have heard of the Pharaoh Thutmoses. That means child of Thoth. Ramses, even though it's pronounced differently, right? We pronounce it Ramses, is actually Ramoses. It's Ra or Re, the sun god. Moses is child, so it's child of Re, child of the sun god, right? That's why Pharaoh had that name, because Horus was the son of Re, the sun god. So that's why Moses is prodigal there. But we can understand why Moses would have an Egyptian name, right? Because he's adopted by Pharaoh and grows up in Pharaoh's household. Aaron also has an Egyptian name, his brother. And most tellingly, his sister Miriam, her name is actually Miriamne. And Miriamne is an Egyptian name. And not only is it an Egyptian name, it's an Egyptian name that has the name of an Egyptian god in it. Miriamne means the beloved of Amun, who was one of the localizations of Re, the sun god. So not just Moses, but also his brother and sister have these Egyptian names, not Hebrew names, not Israelite names. So that's an interesting thing. Now, this time in history, of course, nobody knows DNA exists. There's no concept of ethnicity in that sense, right? Ethnicity is a function at this time in history of what clans and tribes you're a member of. And it doesn't matter if you married into it. You know, if your grandfather was found wandering in the desert and they took him in, and, you know, now you're... So Moses, for example, when he was staying with Jethro, became part of Jethro's clan, part of Jethro's extended family, even though he was not biologically related to Jethro. And then especially once he married Zipporah, Jethro's daughter, right? So he's kind of married into it, but he was a part of that family, even though he was not directly... I mean, you could go back to Abraham and say, sure, but he was not directly blood related to Jethro and to those other folks. So that's how ethnicity was decided. It wasn't based on who your parents were, or what skin tone you had, or even where you were from originally, where your ancestors were from originally. It was based on what social unit you were a member of now. Okay. So this is, from our perspective now, the way we use the term ethnicity, a sign of ethnic, what we would call ethnic diversity within Israel. But probably the most pointed example here is in verse 25, where Aaron's son Eleazar is going to end up being the second high priest. Something bad's going to happen to his two older brothers, Nadab and Abihu, and Eleazar is going to end up becoming the high priest after Aaron. But Eleazar marries one of the daughters of Putiel. Put, which is where this woman is from, was the name at this time for southern Libya. So Eleazar, Aaron's son, married, what this is saying is, married a Black African woman. And further, pretty much proof of that is that they have this son named Phineas. Phineas is a Hebrew transliteration of the Egyptian word Pinihas, which literally means black-skinned one. It's one of the words that Egyptians use to refer to the Nubians, the people who live to the south and southwest of them, right, in Egypt. Phineas, we're going to see later, we're going to see more of later in the book of Numbers, and Phineas becomes the third high priest of Israel. So whatever image we have in our head of what ancient Israelites look like, we have to moderate that with the third high priest of the nation of Israel was Black by our definitions, right? He was an African with a very dark, highly melanated skin tone, however we want to express that. So again, being an Israelite is not an ethnic thing in our modern definition of ethnicity, ever. Right? In the Old Testament, that is not what it is. So there's not a shift from Old Testament to New Testament, from ethnic to multi-ethnic, or ethnic to non-ethnic, or national Israel to some other kind of Israel, right? We need to get all that out of our head. That's all just anachronistic modern projections back, right? What's going to unite these people is the experience of being freed from Egypt that we're going to see, and then the ritual life worshiping Yahweh, the God of Israel, going forward. But we'll see more of that as we go on. Suffice here to say that just these preliminary sort of clan lists we get here reveal to us how diverse, right, the people are who are going to form the nation of Israel, even people who are in the positions of greatest power and authority within Israel in the earliest stages. So verse 26, now these are the same Aaron and Moses to whom God said, bring out the children of Israel from the land of Egypt with their army. These are the ones who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring out the children of Israel from Egypt. These are the same Moses and Aaron, right? So we're like, these guys we were just talking about here, the genealogy, that's the people we've been following, right? Same people. And actually, as I look at it, I think the last little bit of chapter 6 will leave, because otherwise we're going to have Moses saying something to God and then not hear God's response for a month. So we'll go ahead and leave off here, and we'll pick up next month with Exodus chapter 6, verse 28. So I know we have one question at least left over from the last one, and then we'll go from there if anybody has any questions from tonight.
Yes, Father, if I could, I'll put the question in the chat, and it's not specifically relating to this Bible study. It's from somebody who has been watching the videos, and since it's a men's Bible study, it has to deal with the role of the man. Let me just go ahead and
Sure.
I'll put it in the chat, and then I'll just read it out loud for anyone who's listening. So a gentleman named Bogdan actually sent this question as a comment to our last Bible study video. He says, greetings, Father Stephen. I was wondering if manhood, to be a man, is rather a mission for this fallen, corrupted world only, that is to guide, to lead, even to protect through the evil of the world, probably until the arrival of Jesus Christ and of the world to come, the kingdom of heaven? Or is it manhood that is all men's guiding function and mission, relevant and maintained even in the kingdom of heaven?
Yeah. So this is one of those, there are continuities and discontinuities things. So I'll start with the continuities. So one of the things that we're told in the book of Revelation about the saints and glory now and about our life in the world to come is that we are going to be priests, right, in a fulfilled sense. So in the sense that we've talked about, and that we talked about some last time, I believe, that the connection between priesthood and masculinity, right? So in that sense, right, there's a continuity even into the life of the world to come, sort of that role. On the other hand, right, the other piece is the discontinuity, right? So for example, women are no longer going to be bearing children, right? We're told by Christ in the New Testament, right? So, and men, in the sense of, being the ones who take the lead in terms of putting the world in order, the world isn't going to be full of chaos and sin and that kind of thing, right, for us to have to struggle against, right, in the world to come. So there will also be sort of discontinuities. So the way I think I would express it is that the role we're going to have in sort of God's administration over the world to come is going to be the fulfillment, sort of the refinement, the purification of what we're called to do in this world, right? That we can now only do partially and with struggle and with difficulty, right? It will sort of be wide opened up, right, and fulfilled in the world to come. But anybody who comes to you and implies that after this life in this world, biological sex and or gender are going to disappear, is someone who needs to be watched very closely. I won't name names, but you need to keep an eye on such people, because they're at least flirting around with Gnosticism. And don't try and tell me St. Maximus said that. St. Maximus did not say that. I will take you into the Greek and show you that he did not say that. That's right. And the proof of that is that our Lord and God and Savior Jesus Christ, after the resurrection, is still male. Right? He is not androgynous. He is not, right? He is still he is still male, right? And so anybody who comes at you wanting to fiddle around with that, tell them you're not going to listen, and then keep a close eye on them. See what else they get up to.
There's so many to keep a close eye on these days.
Yeah.
That was a great response, though. Thank you. We have Derek Waters with his hand virtually raised. If anybody else has questions, feel free to raise your hand virtually or unmute, or just type it in the chat. Derek, did you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. This chapter feels like to me like a setup for a reoccurring pattern, and probably for a long while too. As I pay attention to this, you see, he goes with Aaron. They make this, our Lord said, we need to go 3 days, feast, et cetera, et cetera. And there's no signs or anything done. And the Pharaoh, let's just give him the best read possible, could say, you know what? I think these guys are just being lazy and trying to go take a 6-day break. And he goes further than needed, makes everything harder on them. He probably doesn't even believe that there is this God, so he shows that he is a tyrant. And later on, you'll see that his heart is hardened. It seems like he would be going down that road anyways. And even more so, you see that the people also, without a sign or without a wonder, just want to say, hey, no more of this stuff. So am I wrong to kind of see that this is an interesting pattern that shows without, and sometimes even with, God's intervention, people still seem to fall into that Moses pattern of disbelief through the calling? Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah. And I think this gives us not only a window into a very human Moses, but again, these things aren't put in there to sort of critique these people, and we're going to see Moses grow and change, but it's because to some extent we have all been and continue to be Moses, right? I can't count the number of times in my life when I was pretty sure God was calling me to do something. And this could be simple things, right? I mean, this doesn't have to be like God is calling you to be a priest, or God is calling you to be a missionary in a foreign country or something like that. This could be like, you see a homeless person, you have $5 in your pocket, you should give them the $5, right? This could be a very simple thing that happens fairly regularly. What I really ought to do is give him this $5, but how quickly I'm able to have this litany of excuses appear in my head. Well, he probably won't use it wisely, as if I use all of my money really wisely, right? Or he might go and use it to buy alcohol, as if I never drink alcohol, right? Or he might use it to go buy cigarettes, as if, I've never smoked a cigar, right? Or, oh, he's probably just lazy and he should go get a job, as if I'm never lazy, right? As if I'm entitled to every penny I've ever received, and have truly earned it. So it's very easy for us to do the same thing in all kinds of simple situations and in bigger situations in terms of our whole lives and our vocations and those kind of things, right? Very easy to come up with all these excuses, why I'm not up to it, why I'm not able to do it, why I can't do it. And as I was saying earlier, part of then our sort of faithfulness is being able to move past that to, yes, but God can, right? As St. Paul ultimately said, I could do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Right. So yeah, I think this is a pattern. We are going to see it recur for a while here, and we're going to see it specifically recur with Pharaoh, the going back and forth, right, with Pharaoh, where Pharaoh is just going to keep doubling down and raising the stakes, right? Sort of at every encounter, like he did here, right? And you know, like I said, the Israelites at this point are just sort of totally broken. I mean, they're a traumatized people, right? They're not even at a point where they can even think about, right? Like the idea, I think for them at this point, the idea of hoping that God is going to deliver them from slavery, I think would probably hurt. Having that idea in their head while they're undergoing this slave labor would be kind of torture for them. Like they're scared to even dare to have hope, right? That this could happen at this point. Which is also a place that we could get. That we could get to dark points in our life at various times where we're sort of scared to even hope, because we're scared that if we start to hold out hope that God can do something and this can get better and God can fix it, right? That if that then doesn't happen, it's going to totally destroy us, you know? And so there's a certain courage and bravery in hoping in God and maintaining hope in God and maintaining faithfulness to God in the light of, you know, in the face of these kind of oppressive, right, and hopeless seeming circumstances.
All right, does anybody have another question for Father Stephen? Feel free to unmute.
Anyone?
We got a quiet group.
Bueller?
Going once.
So I got, I guess, an addendum to that question, or what you said at the end there, about about the courage necessary to trust God. Excuse me, I got Bluey in the background. Is that sort of what's getting gotten at, or is that something that we can take away from God's response to Job? I think where he says something like, "Gird yourself up like a man," or "Gird your loins like a man." That necessity of courage.
Yeah, I think so. I think so, because God says that when God finally is going to come and talk to him, right? So he's like, you know, you just stand up. We're gonna sort this out. And yeah, that's the courage to still hold out hope, and not just hold it out somewhere in our heart or in our mind for ourselves, but to hold out hope for other people when everything seems lost, right? And when there's no way from a human perspective that any of this is going to work out, right? Takes a supreme amount of courage, right? We tend to think it requires naivete or being delusional, right? But in actuality, it's courage, right? And the reason it's courage is because God actually exists, right? And it's having the courage to put our trust in him rather than being afraid to, right? Rather than being afraid to, because we think it won't really work out, or he won't really do what he's promised to do, or he isn't really who we've known him to be or who he says he is, right? That takes courage, right? And trusting anyone always takes a certain amount of bravery. Trusting God is no exception, but trusting anyone, because the more you trust someone, the more you open yourself up to being hurt by them, right? A good way to protect yourself is to be like Stone Cold Steve Austin, right? DTA, don't trust anybody, right?
Kick a mud hole in them and stomp it dry.
Yeah. That's like, you know, then you know, it's a good way to not get hurt a lot, right? But that's not a way any of us want to live either, right? Actually living that way, right? So yeah, trust always is always opening yourself up to the possibility of being hurt, right? But of everyone and everything that exists in the universe, God is the one thing that we always can trust, right? He is the one who we always can trust. Everybody else will let us down. If you put all your trust in me, I will eventually let you down, right? I will eventually steer you wrong. I will eventually get you in trouble, right? But that's not true of Christ. It's not true of God.
Father, as you were talking, it reminds me of how we should understand coming to the sacrament of confession, and the vulnerability that's required, but properly understood is really the courage that's required to confess, our deepest sins. And as you were talking about, responding to Seth's question about Job, and I mean, anytime we approach God, having that courage is ultimately what releases us from those sins, because God knows what they are already. It's about us coming to terms with those sins, feeling sorry, and confessing. Is that an accurate description?
Yeah. And I've had many times as a priest where somebody, especially young guys, come to me and have to confess something that's kind of embarrassing and even humiliating. And I've had them say to me after they confess it, Father, I hope you don't think less of me now that you know that I did that. And I've gotten to tell them every time, I think more of you, right? I respect you more now. The courage, right, that it took you to come and admit that and say that out loud, right? And face that, right? I am incredibly impressed with you. That is a heroic thing to do, right? The most heroic thing that we can do is honestly look at ourselves and face up to ourselves and who we are and what we've made of ourselves. And it's heroic because it's only by doing that, as scary as it is, by doing that, that we can then be healed and become something better.
Thank you, Father. We're almost at time. We have a couple of minutes if anyone has a last minute question.
Maybe just a quick clarification, if I may. At the beginning, you said that Moses may have not been circumcised, but earlier I think I asked you how the Pharaoh's daughter knew he was Hebrew because he was probably really hairy and had a full beard. So was it that he was circumcised then, and that's what she really knew about, or was it something else?
Right. Well, in that one instance, we understand that he's not circumcised, but this will be an interesting note to go out on. But so Egyptian circumcision and Israelite circumcision were not the same. Right. So to do this as delicately as possible and without hand gestures, I'm putting my hand down out of the camera. The Hebrew circumcision is the kind of circumcision you would be familiar with, right? That it's literally cutting around, right? Egyptian circumcision was done by cutting laterally in a line. And so sort of opening, I don't want to get too graphic, opening a flap, right? Sort of straight, one cut straight across rather than cutting around. And so what we know from the bridegroom of blood episode is that Moses had not circumcised himself was not circumcised in the Hebrew way. He may have been circumcised in the Egyptian way.
Ouch.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's definitely an interesting note to go out on. But
yeah.
such are our men's Bible studies. We talk about the most important.
Yes. The deeply spiritual and the incredibly graphic.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. So, okay. Well, I just wanted to confirm while we're wrapping things up that our next Bible study will be just before the start of Great Lent, if I'm looking at the calendar correctly. So February the 16th. And Lent doesn't officially start for another maybe week and a half after that. So is that a good day for you, Father?
Yep.
Okay, so February the 16th will be our next Bible study for Antiochian men. And we appreciate everybody that participated with us tonight. We had a big group here with us this evening. And of course, we'll post this on YouTube as usual. And as always, thank you, Father Stephen, for your time, incredible insights, and graphic clarity.
Hey, somebody asked.
No, it was great. I mean, we always know we're going to get the truth from you. That's why it's.
And you never know, someday you might go on Jeopardy or something, and that might be the final Jeopardy question.
The difference between Egyptian and
Jewish circumcision. Yeah, and you'll know.
I hope it's Aaron Rodgers just out of his mind on DMT asking that question. It was trying to make the whole thing complete.
All right. Well, before we get too rowdy, we will leave you all. Thank you all for joining. Have a great evening, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night. Thanks.